Imagine a world where for 400 years God's voice falls silent. A world where His people are left in a state of waiting, questioning, and uncertainty. This isn't a fictional dystopia. It's the reality that followed the prophet Malachi, the last messenger of the Old Testament, but who Malachi, the last prophet of the Old Testament, lived in a time of spiritual decline among the Israelites. Returning from Babylonian exile, they struggled to maintain their faith and practice. Malachi's message addressed the moral corruption of the priests, the people's disillusionment, and the fading traditions. He boldly confronted religious hypocrisy, called for genuine worship, and offered hope for the future. Malachi's words bridged the gap between the Old and New Testaments, setting the stage for the coming of Jesus Christ. His timeless truths remain relevant today, offering insights into faith, relationships, and God's ongoing story. Malachi's calling was unique in that it lacked the dramatic supernatural elements often associated with other prophets. Instead, he was chosen by God to address the spiritual decline of the Israelites. His message was a divine response to a people who had lost their way. Malachi was tasked with confronting the people's sins and challenging their hollow religiosity. Despite the weight of this responsibility, he also offered a message of hope and restoration for those who would return to God. His calling served as a bridge connecting God's past dealings with Israel to His future plans, pointing towards a coming day of redemption. Malachi's message addresses the spiritual apathy of the Israelites, calling them to true faith instead of empty rituals. He challenges their complacency and points them towards the hope found in God alone. His prophecies remain relevant today, addressing issues that still resonate in modern churches and hearts. Malachi begins by affirming God's love for Israel, which they had begun to question. He then turns his attention to the corrupt practices of the priests, accusing them of offering defiled food on God's altar. This highlights the importance of genuine worship and the negative impact of religious hypocrisy. Malachi's message continues to address relevant issues today, including the importance of genuine worship, the value of faithful relationships, and the need to care for the vulnerable. He condemns divorce, social injustice, and religious hypocrisy. Malachi's most famous prophecy is his promise of a coming messenger, which is fulfilled by John the Baptist. He also speaks of the day of the Lord, a time of judgment and vindication. However, there is also hope in this prophecy, as Malachi speaks of the Son of Righteousness, who will bring healing. These prophecies serve as a mirror for our souls, urging us to examine the depth of our faith, the integrity of our worship, the faithfulness of our relationships, and our treatment of others. Malachi's message challenges us to embrace a faith that is transformative and has a real impact on the world around us. Israel's decline was characterized by a deep spiritual apathy and a lack of true devotion. The initial excitement of returning from exile and rebuilding the temple had faded, giving way to a gradual slide into mediocrity. The priests offered blemished sacrifices, marriages were treated casually, tithing was neglected, and the people were spiritually blind. This decline was the result of small compromises and a reluctance to honor God. It serves as a cautionary tale for us today. Malachi's message offers hope for Israel despite their spiritual decline. God, through Malachi, calls them back to Himself and promises restoration. He invites them to return to Him, assuring them that the path back is always open. Malachi also prophesies about the coming of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, who will bring healing and restoration. The prophet concludes with a promise of the return of Elijah, which is fulfilled by John the Baptist. Malachi's significance lies in his role as the last prophet of the Old Testament, serving as a vital link between the Old and New Testaments. His message of restoration and renewal is relevant for today's believers, reminding us of God's ongoing work in our lives. The name Malachi means "my messenger," reflecting his divine commission to deliver God's words. This serves as a reminder for all believers that we are called to be messengers of the gospel. We are chosen people, representing Christ in the world. Malachi's legacy extends beyond his own time, continuing to shape our understanding of faith, prophecy, and God's relationship with His people. He had a profound impact on post-exilic Israel, calling them back to genuine faith and proper worship. His words serve as a bridge between the Old and New Testaments, connecting the prophetic tradition to the narrative of Jesus Christ. Malachi's prophecies about the coming messenger and the Son of Righteousness are seen as messianic. His emphasis on social justice and integrity in worship challenges believers today. Ultimately, Malachi's legacy reminds us of God's unchanging love and His ongoing work in the world. Malachi's influence on the New Testament is evident in the connections between his prophecies and the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. His prophecies about the coming messenger, Elijah, the cleansing of the temple, and the Son of Righteousness find fulfillment or parallels in the New Testament. These connections underscore the continuity of God's plan and the prophetic insight granted to Malachi. Malachi's emphasis on sincere worship, righteous living, and the sanctity of marriage is echoed in Jesus' teachings. His prophecies about the day of judgment and restoration resonate throughout the New Testament. Overall, Malachi's words helped lay the groundwork for the New Testament narrative, creating a sense of anticipation and providing a framework for understanding Jesus' ministry and the early Christian message. If you have enjoyed watching the video so far, please support me with your likes. Malachi's message remains relevant for today's Christians, offering timeless wisdom for their faith journey. He challenges us to examine our hearts and give God our best in worship, to honor our commitments in marriage, and to lead with integrity in Christian leadership. His message also reminds us of the importance of generosity, the need to be prepared for Christ's return, and the assurance of God's unchanging love. Malachi's legacy continues to resonate with Christians today, reminding us of God's enduring love and His call to authentic faith. His words challenge us to examine our own lives and faith, asking if we are giving God our best, honoring our commitments, and living with integrity. These questions remain relevant for modern Christians. Malachi's prophecies point us forward, reminding us of the tension between what God has done and what He will do. We are called to live faithfully in this in-between time, eagerly anticipating Christ's return. Malachi's message bridges the gap between the Old and New Testaments, reminding us that God's character and expectations for His people remain constant, even in changing times. Let Malachi's words inspire us to renew our commitment to God. May we worship Him sincerely, love others faithfully, live with integrity, give generously, and look forward to Christ's return with hope and anticipation. Malachi's legacy endures as we move forward from this study. Let us carry his message in our hearts, allowing it to transform our relationship with God, influence our interactions with others, and shape our perspective on life. In the words of this ancient prophet, we find timeless wisdom for living out our faith in the modern world. As we conclude our journey through the life and message of Malachi, we are reminded of the powerful impact one voice can have, even in a time of silence. Malachi's words, though spoken centuries ago, still resonate with us today, calling us to a deeper, more authentic faith. His message bridges the gap between the Old and New Testaments, reminding us that God's plans are always unfolding, even when we cannot see them. Malachi challenges us to examine our worship, our relationships, and our commitment to living out God's truth in our daily lives. He reminds us that God's love is unchanging, His promises are sure, and His desire for our hearts is unwavering. As we continue on our own spiritual journeys, let us take Malachi's message to heart, striving to live with the same boldness, integrity, and hope that he proclaimed. Malachi, the last prophet of the Old Testament, cried out with a loud voice, "Return to God." In a time when people had lost their faith, he called them to repentance and return to God with harsh and direct words. Malachi asks us to be sincere in our worship, faithful to each other, and ready for the coming of the Messiah. His message, even in today's world, remains fresh and challenges us to think and change. Malachi reminds us that God's love is always constant and that He is always waiting for our return. So let us return to God with a pure heart and a renewed spirit.